My name is Amber Mitchell, and by the age of 29, I thought I had a solid grasp of what it meant to be let down by family. I had experienced the cold sting of being excluded from holiday celebrations, being left out of Christmas plans, had cut deep, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The day I received that envelope, thick, cream-colored, and embossed with elegant gold script, everything changed. Inside was a bill. Not just any bill, but an invoice totaling $52,000, 0 cents. It was for a luxury car purchased in my name, Jessica's name on the registration, my credit used to finance it. 10 years of subtle coercion, gaslighting, and emotional blackmail had culminated in that moment. They had crossed a line so bold, so deliberate, that something inside me finally snapped. For once, I saw things clearly. I picked up my phone and made a call that would unravel everything I'd known about my family. If you're watching this right now, maybe you're surrounded by people you love, perhaps gathered for a holiday or just enjoying a peaceful moment together. If that's you, please cherish those real, honest connections. And if you've ever felt alone in a room full of people who are supposed to love you, let me tell you how I've found the strength to reclaim my life and reimagine what family truly means. I grew up in Westchester County, New York. Our house was a pristine 5-bedroom colonial nestled on a tree-lined street, complete with manicured lawns and a gleaming 3-car garage. From the outside, the Mitchells looked like the quintessential all-American family. My father, Richard, was a successful investment banker, and my mother, Diana, thrived in the spotlight of local charities and social clubs. We were the picture of prosperity. But behind the polished facade, our home was an emotional desert. Affection was a currency, doled out when convenient. Love was a contract, measured and weighed against performance. When Jessica was born, I was 4, and everything shifted. She was effortlessly captivating, radiant, loud, impulsive. I was quiet, diligent, and introverted. Where I was viewed as too serious, Jessica's flair was celebrated. Her tantrums were labeled passionate. My requests for boundaries or fairness were seen as complaints. Jessica got horseback riding lessons just because she liked ponies. I had to maintain perfect grades to be considered for piano lessons. At 16, Jessica was handed the keys to a brand new Audi, gift-wrapped in a big red bow. My 16th birthday came with a used Honda Civic and a stern lecture on humility and practicality. Still, I persisted. I studied hard, graduated top of my class, and earned a scholarship to Cornell. I double-majored in economics and business, landed prestigious internships, and carved out a path for myself. By 24, I was a junior financial analyst at a respected Manhattan firm. At 27, I had my own apartment, a healthy 401k, and full financial independence. But success came with strings. Every family gathering became a minefield of passive-aggressive remarks about my lifestyle. I was too focused on work or missing out on life. The same parents who worshipped status symbols like country clubs and designer clothes mocked my ambition while quietly benefiting from it. It began with small things: Jessica needing help with rent, Dad needing a loan for a short-term investment, or a donation to Mom's charity event. Because I was doing so well, at first I helped. I told myself it was just family being family, but the asks grew. 3 years ago, I paid off $12,000, 0 cents in credit card debt, for Jessica. She cried, promised she'd change, said she finally saw how damaging her choices had been. 6 months later, she maxed out her cards again, this time on a week-long trip to Bali. When I called her out, Mom sat me down, telling me that Jessica just experiences life differently. She reminded me, again, how blessed I was to have my finances in order. Last year, I covered my parents' property taxes. They said they were short this month, but they had just bought a vacation home in the Hamptons. When I questioned it, Dad hit me with a guilt trip about how they sacrificed everything for my education, conveniently ignoring the scholarships and loans I had worked so hard for and only just finished repaying. Despite it all, I still yearned for their approval. That longing never went away. So, last October, I tried one more time to bring us together. I organized a weekend getaway in Manhattan, my treat. I booked a luxury suite, got Broadway tickets to a show Jessica had been raving about, and made reservations at a high-end restaurant. I planned everything meticulously. The weekend itself was passable, though hardly enjoyable. My mother spent most of it criticizing the size of my apartment, while Jessica dominated every conversation with tales of relationship chaos, exaggerated drama, and wild anecdotes. After that trip, things deteriorated. Jessica began calling during my work hours with so-called emergencies. When I couldn't immediately send money or drop what I was doing, I'd get long, guilt-laced texts. My parents joined in, doubling down on how Jessica was just living fully, while I was apparently cold or disconnected. By December, I felt emotionally exhausted, but I still clung to the hope of Christmas. I bought thoughtful presents, wrapped them lovingly, and braced myself for the usual dance of pretending everything was okay while swallowing my resentment. But this Christmas would cut deeper than ever before. On December 15th, a Wednesday that started out like any other, my world tilted. During my lunch break, I absentmindedly scrolled through Instagram. That's when I saw it. My cousin Taylor had posted a picture of my entire extended family gathered around a massive twinkling Christmas tree in my parents' living room. The caption read, "Early Mitchell Christmas. So grateful to be with everyone I love. Everyone except me." I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. My father, in a festive sweater, carving turkey. My mother, smiling as she arranged presents. Jessica, holding court with a glass of wine, surrounded by aunts, uncles, cousins, even second cousins I barely knew. All of them gathered in warmth and cheer, and not a single word had been said to me. Not a text, not a call. Hand shaking, I dialed my mom. She picked up on the fourth ring, voice sugary sweet. "Oh, Amber, how are you, sweetheart?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and asked, "Mom, why wasn't I invited to the family Christmas last weekend?" There was a pause. "Oh, that," she said, voice faltering. "It was very last minute, darling." Her words struck like a slap. "Very last minute?" I echoed, disbelief tightening my throat. "You had a house full of people, a fully cooked meal, coordinated gifts, decorations, and no one thought to call me?" Silence. Then came the deflection. "Amber, please don't make this about you. We just didn't want to pressure you during your busy season. You're always working." I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. The excuses. Always the excuses. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the perfectly wrapped gifts I had bought, gifts that would never be opened. Something inside me hardened. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. For 10 years, I had been manipulated, gaslit, and exploited under the illusion of familial love. I finally understood. I had never truly belonged, not in their world. So I made a decision. I called a lawyer. I had always helped with informal loans, but I was done. I had the receipts, the transfers, the texts. Over $70,000, 0 cents had left my account in the last 6 years alone. We drafted a cease and desist letter. I blocked Jessica on every platform. I restricted my parents' calls. I took a week off work and flew to Colorado, where my college roommate invited me to spend Christmas with her family. And for the first time in my adult life, I laughed over Coco, joined in silly board games, and felt seen, not for what I gave, but for who I was. The Christmas taught me something vital. Blood may tie people together, but it doesn't guarantee kindness, respect, or love. Sometimes the family you're born into fails you, and it's okay to walk away. You're not selfish for protecting your peace. You're not cold for setting boundaries. Since then, I've built a life where love is mutual, not transactional. I'm still healing, but now I know real family isn't who demands your loyalty while draining your spirit. It's the ones who show up without being asked, the ones who care without cost, the ones who see you truly and choose to stay. "We just assumed you were busy with work like always," my mother said, her tone laced with practiced innocence. "Jessica mentioned you told her you had plans." I blinked, stunned. I never said that, I replied, my voice low, firm. I didn't make any plans because I was expecting to spend Christmas with my family. She sighed dramatically, the way she always did when she was about to excuse something inexcusable. Amber, please don't start. It was just a casual gathering, nothing formal. Then came the justification I knew was coming. You know how Jessica gets when she feels overshadowed by you? She's been going through such a hard time lately, and we didn't want to create any tension. You understand, don't you, sweetheart? You've always been our strong one. That phrase, our strong one, was code. It meant the one we can ignore, the one who doesn't cause trouble, the one we don't need to consider because she'll always endure. It wasn't a compliment, it was a license to neglect. Before I could gather my response, she added, but of course we'll see you on Christmas Day for the real celebration. Her voice had a forced cheer, as if tossing me a leftover crumb. The invitation felt more like damage control than genuine desire for my presence. Later that night, Jessica's texts lit up my phone. Sorry you missed the party. It was so fun. Mom said you were busy anyway. By the way, can you help me pick out Mom's gift? I'm thinking something in jewelry, but I need your dollar input, lol. Not a trace of acknowledgement about excluding me. No apology, just another thinly veiled demand for money, disguised as sisterly connection. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, my mind flooded with old wounds, disguised as memories. The family vacation to Cancun I'd learned about through Facebook photos. The time they all showed up 3 hours late to my college graduation dinner because Jessica had a fender bender that demanded immediate attention. Or the promotion celebration I had planned, which ended abruptly when Jessica called sobbing about her latest breakup. Every milestone in my life had been eclipsed by her chaos. And everyone else enabled it. By morning, something within me had shifted. I opened my phone and typed a short message to my mother. I won't be coming for Christmas Day. I've made other plans. Her reply came within minutes. What plans could possibly be more important than family? The irony burned. That word, family, had become an echo, a shadow of something it was supposed to represent. I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Leah, my closest friend since college. Every year, she had extended an open invitation for me to join her family's holiday celebrations. I had always declined, choosing duty over desire. This time, I asked, "Is the offer still open?" "Of course," she said without hesitation. "Mom always sets a place for you anyway. You're family to us, Amber." That one sentence broke me. The contrast between Leah's immediate warmth and my own family's calculated neglect was overwhelming. I cried, tears of relief, grief, and gratitude. In the days that followed, I dove headfirst into creating new traditions. I helped Leah's family decorate their Christmas tree, stringing lights and reminiscing over old ornaments. I baked cookies using her grandmother's handwritten recipes, the kitchen filled with laughter and the scent of cinnamon. I wrapped presents for people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. And all the while, my phone buzzed with a chorus of guilt. My father left a voicemail claiming I was breaking my mother's heart. Jessica's texts ranged from manipulative to maddening, swinging between guilt trips and demands for shopping advice. Even distant relatives who rarely spoke to me suddenly had strong opinions about my selfishness. The only call that brought me comfort came from Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, long considered the family's black sheep. "I heard you're not coming to Christmas," she said when I answered. Smart girl. We talked for nearly an hour. She told me that the so-called casual gathering had been planned months in advance. "I saw the printed invitations when I visited your parents in September," she said. Her words confirmed what I had suspected but didn't want to believe. It hadn't been a last-minute oversight. It was intentional. Then she added something that made my stomach drop. Jessica totaled her car last month. Apparently, she drove it into a ditch after another one of her nights out. Your parents have been scrambling ever since to replace it without touching their Hamptons renovation fund. I thanked her, though I didn't know what to say. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Their rush to sideline me hadn't been about avoiding drama. It had been about access. They didn't want me asking questions about finances, while they orchestrated yet another bailout for Jessica. Still, I pushed it out of my mind. I wanted to be present, truly present, for my new holiday. Christmas Day with Leah's family was the kind of warmth I had long forgotten. We feasted on roast beef and mashed potatoes, played board games that turned competitive in the best way, and shared memories around the fire. When Leah's father raised his glass and said, "To family, both born and chosen," I felt something deep inside begin to heal. That night, I returned to my apartment carrying leftover pie, a hug that actually meant something, and an invitation to their New Year's Eve celebration. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel the compulsion to check my phone. I wasn't waiting for my mother's approval or Jessica's next crisis. I was free. But peace has a way of being interrupted. 3 weeks later, as January unfurled in a blur of gray skies and dirty snow, I buried myself in work. Spreadsheets were comforting, predictable, unlike family. I was finally making headway on my New Year's resolutions, better boundaries, healthier relationships, and signing up for that financial certification course I had kept postponing. Then came the envelope. It was a Thursday evening when I stopped by the mailroom after work. Tucked between a stack of utility bills and grocery coupons was a thick manila envelope. No return label, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. My mother's elegant cursive, looping carefully over my name and address. I opened it in the elevator. Inside was a stack of documents. The top page, an invoice from Luxury Motors of Westchester. The total, $52,000, 0 cents. Purchaser, Jessica Mitchell. Cosigner, Amber Mitchell. My hands went numb. The elevator doors slid open, but I didn't move. I just stood there, frozen, staring at proof that the people who called themselves my family had used me again, and this time on paper. That moment crystallized everything. This wasn't just another misstep or miscommunication. It was a betrayal, signed and sealed. All those years I had justified their behavior, made excuses, hoped they would change. Gone. With trembling fingers, I placed the documents on my kitchen counter, sat down, and let the silence settle. I wasn't going to be their collateral anymore. Not their safety net, not their scapegoat, not their invisible daughter who always said yes. I was done. As I stood there in my apartment foyer, my knees buckled, and the stack of papers nearly slipped from my grasp. The top document was a dealership invoice, a brand new Mercedes GLE coupe, complete with all the bells and whistles. The price tag, just over $70,000, 0 cents. Financed with monthly payments of $1,138, 0 cents, over 5 years. My eyes scanned the paperwork, my vision blurring as disbelief settled into my bones. There, printed clearly at the bottom of the loan agreement, was my name, listed as the cosigner. And worse, my signature was there too, only it wasn't mine. Heart hammering, I fumbled with my keys and rushed inside. I barely made it to the couch before collapsing into the cushions, the documents spilling out across the coffee table like shrapnel from an emotional explosion. One by one, I flipped through them. Loan agreements, insurance coverage, extended warranties, and tucked inside a handwritten note on pale pink stationery, with a heart doodled at the top corner. "Thanks for helping with the new car," it read in Jessica's bubbly handwriting. "The old one was totaled and I needed reliable transportation. Mom and Dad said you'd understand since you're doing so well. Payment details attached. First one's due Feb 1st. Love you, sis. XOXO." I sat in stunned silence. My stomach turned as the casual entitlement in her message took shape in my mind. She had wrecked her previous car, drunk, according to Aunt Patricia, and her solution was to forge my name on a luxury vehicle loan. No remorse, no apology, just an expectation that I'd be thrilled to finance her latest lifestyle choice. And worse, my parents had clearly condoned, perhaps even orchestrated, the whole thing. I called my parents immediately, my fingers trembling. My father answered on the second ring. "Amber, did you get the paperwork we sent?" he asked, as though he were inquiring about a holiday card. "Dad, what is this?" I demanded, barely able to control my tone. "I never agreed to co-sign for Jessica's car. That's not my signature." There was a pause before he responded, in a tone so condescending it made my skin crawl. "Now, Amber, don't be dramatic. We knew you'd want to help your sister. She's been through a trauma with the accident." "The accident that was her fault because she was driving drunk?" I shot back, recalling Patricia's revelation. "That's beside the point," he said, brushing it off like a minor detail. "She needs a car for her new job." "And dreaded what new job?" I asked, skeptical. As far as I knew, Jessica hadn't held a steady position in years. "She has an interview next week," he admitted, almost proudly. "But she needs to make a good impression. The Mercedes will help with that." I blinked. A Mercedes helps with interviews now? The absurdity would have been laughable if it weren't so vile. I tried again. "Dad, someone forged my signature. That's fraud." "You're being difficult," he replied, his voice shifting to impatience. "Your mother signed for you. We knew you'd resist, but family helps family. And you, of all people, can afford it. Don't be selfish." It felt like a punch. The casual confession of forgery, the entitlement to my income, the refusal to see me as anything more than a financial safety net. It was staggering. My voice shook. "This is illegal. I'm not paying for Jessica's car." Within minutes of hanging up, my phone exploded with messages from Jessica. "Dad said you're being difficult about the car. I need this, Amber. You're so selfish. You don't even drive a Mercedes. Why do you care? If you don't help me, I'll be stranded." Each text was more outrageous than the last, each word a reminder of how little they respected me. I turned my phone off, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of wine. My hands were still trembling. The next morning, I called in sick to work, for the first time in 3 years. I needed to process this, to understand my legal standing. A quick online search confirmed my fear. Even if I hadn't signed the papers, I could be held liable unless I took action and reported the fraud. Panic rising, I logged into my bank accounts, needing to ensure nothing else had been tampered with. What I found stopped me cold. The day before, someone had attempted to access my main savings account, the one I used to hold my emergency fund and the down payment for my future home. The attempt triggered a security alert, and the bank had locked the account pending verification. I called immediately. The representative confirmed that the attempt had come from a familiar device, my old laptop, the same one I had given to my parents when I upgraded last year. The violation was total. While I was still reeling from being trapped in a fraudulent auto loan, they had actively tried to drain my savings. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was premeditated theft. As I sat back in my chair, stunned and shaking, an email notification pinged across my screen. From Deanna Mitchell. Subject, Jessica's car. "Amber, your father is very disappointed in your reaction. Jessica is heartbroken that you would abandon her in her time of need. As your mother, I must say, I raised you better than this. Family stands together. The car has already been purchased, and Jessica loves it. Don't ruin this for her. She's planning to post about it on Instagram this weekend and wants to thank you publicly for your generosity. Don't embarrass her by creating drama." I read the message 3 times. Not a single sentence acknowledged the fraud. Not one line expressed concern for my rights, my financial safety, or my consent. My value, once again, was measured by how effectively I could be exploited to serve Jessica's image. By that afternoon, the shock had calcified into something else. Resolve. I was done being a pawn in their carefully curated narrative. I called Aunt Patricia. "I'm not surprised," she said after I explained everything. "They did something similar to your cousin Ryan. Co-signed him onto a timeshare without his knowledge. He paid rather than fight it. They're counting on you doing the same." "Not this time," I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "Not anymore." The next day, I walked into the Midtown office of Natalie Hoffman, a fraud attorney, recommended by Leah. Her office, nestled in a converted brownstone, radiated a kind of warm professionalism that immediately put me at ease. Natalie flipped through the documents I had brought with practiced precision. With each page, her brow furrowed deeper. "This," she finally said, removing her glasses, "is textbook fraud. Your mother forged your signature on a legally binding contract. The fact that she's your mother doesn't change the legality of it. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You have several options," she replied, her tone gentle but firm, none of them pleasant. She explained the steps ahead, filing a police report, notifying the dealership, initiating a fraud investigation, and possibly pursuing civil action. It was overwhelming, but for the first time I felt like I had a lifeline. Someone was finally helping me stand up to the people who were supposed to protect me. I left her office with a folder of documents, a list of action items, and a growing sense of power I hadn't felt in years. The fight wasn't going to be easy, but it was finally mine to win. Natalie didn't sugarcoat it. She looked at me with a seriousness that settled like a weight on my chest. "You have 3 options," she said. "First, report the fraud to the police. That would likely result in criminal charges against your mother. Second, report it to the dealership and the bank, marking it as fraud without pressing charges. They might still pursue their own legal action. Or third, you can do nothing and continue paying for a car you never agreed to buy." Put that plainly, the choice should have been obvious, but decades of conditioning made me hesitate. I had spent a lifetime bending, accommodating, trying not to rock the boat. Choosing myself felt foreign, like betraying some unspoken family rule. "But what happens to the car if I report it?" I asked, dreading the answer. Natalie didn't flinch. "Most likely it'll be repossessed, unless your sister or your parents can qualify for the loan on their own." Given everything I knew about their finances, that seemed incredibly unlikely. I nodded, absorbing it all. Her expression softened slightly. "I can't tell you what to do about your relationship with your family, Amber, but you might ask yourself, what kind of relationship do you have with people who would commit fraud against you?" That question clung to me like smoke as I left her office. The legal steps were clear, mapped out in paperwork and procedural options. The emotional wreckage, however, was uncharted. I stood on the curb outside, clutching a folder filled with legal documents while my phone vibrated incessantly in my pocket. When I turned it back on, there were 17 missed calls, 36 text messages, all from various family members. My father had moved quickly from denial to outright threats. "If you pursue this fraud nonsense, consider yourself cut off from this family permanently," one message read. "Your mother is beside herself with your ingratitude." Jessica was all over the place. Rage, guilt, manipulation, desperation. "I already showed everyone the car," one text screamed. "How could you do this to me?" another followed minutes later. "I told you about the job interview. I need to make a good impression." And then the most absurd. "Remember when I covered for you after you crashed Dad's boat? You owe me." I stared at the screen. I had never crashed our father's boat. It was a complete fabrication, conjured out of thin air. The desperation in her lie was almost artistic. Then the outer circle joined the fray. Cousins I heard from once a year suddenly became moral compasses. "Family helps each other," one text read. "This isn't a good look, Amber." Another from Uncle Robert, my dad's brother and longtime business partner. "Keep this private. Don't air family grievances like this. Be mature." The more they pushed, the clearer everything became. This wasn't concern, it was a coordinated pressure campaign designed to make me fold. I documented every message and forwarded them all to Natalie, following her instructions to log communications and limit my responses. I didn't need their emotional traps clouding my judgment anymore. That evening, while I tried to relax with a book and a cup of tea, my phone rang. It was my boss, Sandra. "Amber," she said gently, "is everything all right? The Wellington presentation today seemed not like you." I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "There's a situation with my family," I said. "They forged my signature on a car loan for my sister. I've hired an attorney to deal with it." There was silence on the line. When Sandra spoke, her voice was steady and compassionate. "That's significant. Do you need time off?" "No," I said quickly. "Honestly, work's been a lifesaver. But I might need some flexibility for legal appointments." "Of course," she said without hesitation. "And Amber, don't let anyone take advantage of you, family or not." That moment, brief and unscripted, hit me harder than I expected. It reinforced a truth I was still coming to terms with. Respect has nothing to do with blood. 2 days later, I discovered another attempted breach. Someone had tried to access my investment accounts. The two-factor authentication stopped them, but the intent was clear. I changed every password I had, deleted old recovery questions, and scrubbed anything personal my family might exploit. Then came the phone call from my mother. "Amber Elizabeth Mitchell," she began, using my full name like she always did when invoking guilt. "We need to talk about this car situation like adults. Your father and I are hosting dinner tomorrow. Jessica will be there. We expect you at 7. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Years ago, I would have said yes, immediately. I would have shown up, desperate to explain, to be heard, to be understood. But not this time. This time I agreed because I needed to face them with clarity, with boundaries, with finality. I arrived at the house just before 7. The same stately colonial loomed ahead, unchanged. The hedges were trimmed to perfection, the driveway gleamed. Jessica's new Mercedes was parked front and center, as if on display. My parents' cars were neatly tucked in the garage, as always. My mother answered the door with a practiced smile and an air kiss that brushed the air near my cheek. "Finally ready to be reasonable?" she said with fake warmth, leading me inside. The dining room was set as if for a holiday. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, and a beef stroganoff platter that filled the air with rich, buttery scent. It had been touted as my favorite for years, despite my repeated claims that I hated it. It was Jessica's favorite, not mine. Jessica sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up. My father stood by the fireplace, a tumbler of scotch in one hand, his expression a carefully curated mix of disappointment and disdain. "Sit down, Amber," he said, gesturing to a chair across from Jessica. "Your mother has made dinner. Let's talk calmly." Calm was the last thing on my mind. "As we begin," he started, "I want to express how disappointed we are in your handling of this situation. Involving a lawyer, threatening criminal charges. This isn't how our family operates." "And how does our family operate, Dad?" I asked quietly, placing my hands calmly on the table. "By forging signatures? By draining savings accounts? By excluding people from family gatherings and then expecting them to finance luxury vehicles?" Jessica slammed her fork down, finally looking up. "Oh my God, are you still whining about Christmas? It was just a small gathering." "It was the entire family," I snapped. "Everyone was there but me." "Because you make everything uncomfortable," she shouted. "With your perfect job, your perfect apartment, and your judgment. You've always criticized me." My mother, trying to calm her, placed a hand on Jessica's arm. "Amber, your sister is sensitive, and frankly your jealousy is unbecoming for a woman your age." There it was, the playbook laid bare. Gaslight, deflect, minimize, accuse. I pushed my chair back and stood. "You didn't invite me to Christmas. You forged my name. You tried to empty my accounts, and now you expect gratitude?" "Jessica needed help," my father snapped. "We thought you'd understand." "I do understand," I said. "I understand perfectly. And that's why this ends now." Without waiting for another word, I left the house, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken my power back. Not in silence, not in submission, but in strength. The door clicked shut behind me, and I didn't look back. The moment I stood my ground, the familiar performance began, unfolding exactly as I'd always known it would. Jessica instantly assumed her role, the wounded, misunderstood younger sister. Her voice trembled, her eyes wide with feigned betrayal. In this tired family script, she was always the victim, and I, by default, the cold, ungrateful antagonist. Truth held no currency here. Perception ruled everything. "I'm not paying for the car," I said, my voice sharp with finality. "What you did is illegal. I've frozen every financial account that could be accessed, and I've documented every attempt at fraud." My father's expression darkened, storm clouds gathering behind his eyes. "After everything we've done for you?" I didn't flinch. "What exactly have you done for me?" I asked. And even I was startled by the force in my voice. I worked for my scholarships. I paid off my student loans. I earned every internship and job offer I've ever had. I've built a career on hard work, discipline, and integrity. The silence was brittle. My mother's mouth opened as if to object, but I kept going. Meanwhile, you've coddled Jessica through multiple failed degree programs, covered her debts, bailed her out of every financial mess, and now you've committed fraud to buy her a luxury car she can't afford. My mother's composure cracked for a moment, but then she pulled herself together. We raised you, she snapped. We gave you a home. We gave you opportunities. That's literally the minimum legal obligation of parenthood, I said. And you've treated it like I should be eternally grateful for what? For having a roof over my head? For feeding me? That's not charity. That's your job. Jessica, always quick to escalate, stood so abruptly that her chair clattered to the floor. You think you're so much better than everyone else, Amber. Newsflash. Nobody likes you. Not even your boyfriend. He left because you're a cold, calculating... The word she was going to say didn't land because I cut her off with a quiet reply. Or left because he was cheating, I said. With you. Jessica paled. My parents looked between us in confusion. That detail, it seemed, had been kept from them. I watched as it clicked into place, but no one said a word. No apology, no shock, just a flicker of discomfort. And that was it. These weren't people who simply misunderstood me. They actively disliked me, while expecting me to support them financially, emotionally, and publicly. If you don't pay for this car, my father said, his voice now low and edged with menace, you are no longer part of this family. No more holidays, no inheritance, no connection to the Mitchell name. Once, those words would have gutted me, but now they almost sounded like a release. You're asking me to choose between paying $52,000 0 cents for a car I didn't agree to buy, I said, and maintaining a relationship with people who forged my name, tried to steal from me, lied to my friends, and treat me like a wallet with legs. That's not a hard decision. I stood, folded my napkin neatly, and placed it beside the untouched meal. Stroganoff, Jessica's favorite, not mine, though it had always been served as if it were, another reminder that they never really knew me. As I turned toward the door, my mother called after me, Jessica needs that car. What is she supposed to do? I looked back once, the same thing I did when I needed transportation. Buy a car she can actually afford. The drive home was a blur. My heart pounded, adrenaline flooding my system. I replayed the conversation in my head, each line, each insult, each revelation. I had said everything I had wanted to say for years. And beneath the rage and the grief was a strange sense of peace. I hadn't lost my family that night. I had finally acknowledged that I never truly had one. In the days that followed, something inside me began to settle. I didn't wake up crushed by guilt or panic. I didn't question my decision with the same desperate doubt I once had. The grief came, yes, but it was grief for a version of them I had invented to survive, not the people they really were. Still, the questions lingered. Was I overreacting? Was family loyalty worth more than my boundaries? Had I cut ties with people I was supposed to forgive no matter what? These questions haunted me through sleepless nights and unfocused workdays. I finally made an appointment with Dr. Laura Chin, a therapist who specializes in family trauma. During our second session, she asked a question that stopped me cold. Amber, she said gently, if a close friend came to you and told you this exact story, every detail, what would you tell her to do? I didn't hesitate. I'd tell her to run, to protect herself, to never look back. Dr. Chin nodded slowly. Why is it different when it's your story? I had no answer, but I carried that question with me. Meanwhile, my family's campaign of narrative control continued. Jessica posted a photo with the Mercedes, tagging me in every caption. Best sister ever. Bless, family love, luxury lifestyle. Another. Nothing like a sibling who knows you deserve the best. XOXO Amber. I watched, horrified as the public narrative of sisterly devotion unfolded. They were making it impossible for me to act without appearing vindictive. The minute I went public or pressed charges, I would be framed as the bitter, jealous sister trying to ruin Jessica's life out of spite. My parents went further. They contacted my friends, my coworkers. I began getting strange messages from acquaintances, questions about my mental state, concerns about my financial confusion. My mother called several people in my circle to say she was worried I was having a breakdown. Then came the most outrageous step. My father called my boss. Sandra pulled me into her office later that week. "Your father called me today," she said. "He expressed concern about your emotional stability, said you were having difficulty managing client accounts due to family pressure." I stared at her, mortified. "Sandra, He raised her hand. "Amber, don't. I've worked with crisis PR firms for 2 decades. That was the most obvious smear campaign I've ever heard. The invasion of my professional life crossed a line I didn't even know existed. That night, I met with Marcus, my financial advisor. You need a full financial firewall," he said, after I explained the situation. "We're talking new accounts, new institutions, fresh credit monitoring, and changes to all your beneficiaries. We also need to run a full credit check." The results came in 2 days later. An application had been made to my name for a high-end furniture store credit card. It had been submitted just 2 days after the car was purchased. The application was denied thanks to the fraud alert I had placed. But the attempt said everything. This wasn't just about a car. It was the beginning of what could have become a systematic effort to siphon everything I'd worked for. And then Jessica's social media turned darker. Subtle posts about toxic family members who don't want to see you shine. Posts about haters who destroy what you love because they can't stand to see you happy. One image stood out. Jessica standing beside the Mercedes, arms crossed triumphantly. The caption read, "Some people would rather see you fail than watch you succeed, even family. Stay strong, haters. Gonna 8." It was all so transparent, so shameless. But this time, I wasn't rattled. I was ready. The flood of comments began almost immediately. Beneath Jessica's latest post, her tear-streaked video lamenting the repossession of her beloved Mercedes, friends, extended relatives, and casual acquaintances poured in their sympathy and support. Most had no idea what had really happened. They saw a young woman crying in a parking lot, talking about betrayal and injustice, and they reacted exactly as she'd hoped. One comment in particular stood out. It was from Cousin Taylor, the same one who had once posted the Christmas photos that revealed my exclusion. "Blood doesn't always mean love," she wrote. "Creating boundaries is self-care." The irony was a gut punch. That night, I was curled up on the couch, emotionally raw but strangely calm, when the final message came through. Jessica, clearly drunk, judging by the string of typos and the 2:37 a.m. timestamp, sent a barrage of texts. But one in particular stood out, venomous in its clarity. "You think you are so much better than everyone, but you are just a lonely BTCH with no one who loves you. Mom and Dad only put up with you because you are money. We all laugh at you behind your back. Enjoy your empty apartment while I enjoy my car." I stared at the screen, heart pounding but not with hurt, only with a strange sense of peace. The rawness of her words confirmed everything I'd suspected. It was never about love. It was about utility. I had never truly been accepted or valued, only tolerated because I made their lives more convenient. The realization should have crushed me. Instead, it felt like permission. The next morning, I called Natalie Hoffman. My voice was steady. "I'm ready to proceed with reporting the fraud," I told her. "All of it." "Are you sure?" she asked, her tone gentle but serious. "Once we begin, this will be difficult to undo." "I'm sure," I said. They left me no choice. From there, everything moved quickly. I called the bank that had issued the auto loan. "My name is Amber Mitchell," I told the representative in the fraud department. "I need to report a forged signature on a car loan taken out in my name." After confirming my identity and reviewing preliminary details, I was transferred to a fraud manager named Robert. He had a kind voice, professional but empathetic, and he carefully guided me through each step. I explained everything: Jessica's use of my name and credit, the forged signature, the supporting documents, and Natalie's involvement as legal counsel. "I understand this must be incredibly difficult, Miss Mitchell," he said. "Unfortunately, family fraud is more common than people realize, but reporting it still takes a tremendous amount of courage." "What happens now?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "We'll launch an investigation. It usually takes 5 to 7 business days. If we confirm the forgery, as it sounds likely from your documentation, the loan will be removed from your record. Your name and liability will be cleared. The bank will then decide how to handle the vehicle." "You mean repossession?" "Most likely, yes, unless the other party can independently qualify for the loan. Jessica, I knew, would never qualify. Years of financial irresponsibility had torched her credit. My parents probably could, technically, but they wouldn't. That would defeat the entire reason for using my name in the first place." "I understand," I said. "Please proceed." After I hung up, I sat in the stillness of my apartment. I had just triggered a chain of events that could lead to criminal charges against my mother and the loss of Jessica's car. The reality of it weighed heavily on me, but underneath that, there was a growing sense of pride. For the first time, I had chosen myself. The cost was high, but the alternative, continuing to live as their financial hostage, was no longer an option. I texted Leah with trembling fingers. "I did it. I reported the fraud." Her response came within seconds. "Amber, I'm so proud of you. Want to come over for dinner? Dad's making lasagna." I smiled through tears. Family, real family, wasn't about blood. It was about people who showed up, listened, and respected you. And I had that, even if it wasn't in the people I had grown up with. 3 days later, I got the call from Robert. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "our investigation confirms your signature was forged. We've removed the loan from your record and are proceeding with vehicle repossession." "How soon will that happen?" I asked. My heart thudded in my chest, even though I knew this was the right thing. "The repossession agent has been assigned. It could happen today or tomorrow. They don't give specific times for security reasons." I thanked him, hung up, and tried to prepare myself. But nothing could have braced me for the firestorm that followed. Barely 2 hours later, my phone blew up. Jessica called first, again and again, leaving voicemails that swung wildly from pleading to screaming. "They took my car. How could you do this to me? I'm stranded at the mall. You ruined my life." Didn't answer. Instead, I blocked her number. My parents were next. My father's voice trembled with rage in his message. "What you've done is unforgivable. Your mother is in tears. Jessica is devastated. I never thought my own daughter could be so vindictive and cruel. Don't bother calling back. You are no longer welcome in this house." I blocked them too. Then I went through my contacts one by one and cut off every family member I suspected might be enlisted as their messengers. It felt brutal, like cutting off pieces of myself, but also like removing a tumor I had let grow for far too long. Meanwhile, social media became a battleground. Jessica posted a dramatic, tearful video, sitting in an Uber, dabbing at her eyes, telling her followers about how her sister had stolen her car. She never mentioned the fraud. She didn't need to. The comments poured in. "You deserve better, Jessica. Family is supposed to support you, not betray you. Who could do that to their own sister?" I deactivated all my social media accounts. I didn't need to defend myself in the court of public opinion. The truth was enough. The next morning, the other shoe dropped. Natalie received a call from a lawyer representing my mother. The bank's fraud department had contacted her with evidence of the forged signature and a warning that criminal charges could follow. The lawyer's tone was oily and evasive. He floated vague suggestions of reconciliation and hinted at financial restitution if only I would consider withdrawing my fraud complaint. "They're running scared," Natalie told me, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. "The bank's evidence is clear. Forgery on financial documents is a felony. They're hoping you'll get scared and back down." That afternoon, I took a walk through Central Park, wrapped in my coat, the crisp February wind stinging my face. Children were sledding down the small hills, couples sipping hot chocolate, and street musicians playing cheerful jazz. Life was still moving forward. It struck me that while my entire world had just undergone a seismic shift, the world around me remained blissfully unaware. And maybe that was the point. Not everything had to shatter just because one part did. I stopped at a bench and sat down, watching the people pass by. I pulled out my phone and stared at the last text Leah had sent. "You are not alone." I reread it over and over, each repetition grounding me a little more. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting, I was choosing. I wasn't surviving, I was reclaiming. I would build a life free of guilt, manipulation, and emotional blackmail. A life where I didn't have to justify my worth or apologize for my success. A life where I got to decide what family meant. And I was just getting started. When Natalie relayed my mother's lawyer's offer, an overture cloaked in vague reassurances and subtle threats, she asked the question I had anticipated but still wasn't fully prepared to answer. "They're hoping you'll back down," she said, "to protect your mother from potential criminal charges. What do you want to do?" I paused, not because I wasn't sure of the answer, but because I had spent so long being conditioned to prioritize everyone else's comfort above my own. "What do you advise?" I asked her. "That depends," Natalie replied honestly. "If your goal is justice, we will continue with criminal proceedings. But if your goal is clean separation with as little ongoing conflict as possible, we could negotiate a civil settlement. That would include a notarized admission of wrongdoing, financial compensation for your legal expenses, and a binding agreement that they will never attempt to access your finances again." I didn't hesitate. "Let's go with the second option." I didn't want my mother in jail, not because I still loved her in some maternal, nostalgic way, but because I knew exactly how that would play out. Jessica would make her a martyr. My father would spin it into a morality tale of betrayal and family cruelty. The drama would be endless. What I wanted was closure. Not headlines, not vengeance, just peace. The negotiations took 2 tense weeks. My parents, confronted with the reality of felony fraud and a bank unwilling to let it slide, folded far quicker than I expected. With their attorney acting as the go-between, they agreed to every term Natalie laid out. They would pay all of my legal fees. They would sign notarized statements admitting to the fraudulent activity. They would agree to legally binding no-contact orders and pledges not to interfere in my financial affairs ever again. Wasn't justice, but it was liberation. Throughout the process, I received support from places I never expected. Aunt Patricia called one evening. Her voice was warm and free of judgment. "I'm proud of you, Amber," she said. "Someone needed to stand up to them. They've been pulling these kinds of stunts for years, and everyone else has just been too afraid of being cut off to say anything." Even more surprising was a message from my cousin Ryan. We hadn't spoken in ages, but his text was simple and heartfelt. "Heard what happened, just wanted you to know you're not alone. They tried something similar with me a few years back. I didn't have the guts to fight it. I wish I had." It stunned me. All these years I'd believed I was the only one being used and discarded. In reality, I was just the latest in a long line of family members silenced by fear and shame. Their silence hadn't been weakness. It had been self-preservation. The day the settlement was finalized, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Jessica, of course, using someone else's phone to bypass the block I had placed. "You think you've won, but you've lost everything. Enjoy your money and your empty life. We're all better off without you." Her words were designed to sting, but they didn't. They simply confirmed what I had finally come to accept. My family didn't love me. They had never loved me. Not in the way real love works. They valued my usefulness, my compliance, my silence. The void I felt wasn't about their absence. It was about the revelation that they'd never truly been there to begin with. That evening, I had dinner with Leah and her parents. They had become my rock through all of this, not just offering me shelter and lasagna, but listening without judgment, supporting without strings. "To Amber," Leah's father said, raising his glass, "for having the courage to choose self-respect, over appeasement. Not everyone can. We clinked glasses and ate and laughed and shared stories with no agenda, no guilt, no manipulation. And somewhere in the middle of dessert, it hit me. I wasn't mourning the loss of a family. I was mourning the illusion that I had one to begin with. 6 months passed. Summer crept into New York like a slow sigh, bringing warmth, longer days, and, surprisingly, peace. The settlement was behind me. The no-contact orders were holding firm. My mother had avoided jail. Jessica had downgraded to a modest sedan she financed jointly with my parents. And I, for the first time in years, was free. The transition wasn't seamless. There were nights when I woke in a cold sweat, panicked I'd made some irrevocable mistake. Birthdays and holidays brought bittersweet pangs, especially Mother's Day. I'd stand in the greeting card aisle staring at rows of flowery, saccharine tributes to the best mom ever, and feel like a tourist in someone else's culture. But the benefits of cutting ties ran deeper than I expected. My work improved. Without the constant emotional drain of managing my family's crises, I was sharper, more focused. I earned a promotion and a sizable bonus, which, for the first time, I used for myself. I invested in my future instead of covering someone else's mistakes. My apartment, once mocked by my mother as claustrophobic and uninspired, became a sanctuary. I redecorated every corner with things I loved, not what was trendy or expensive or approved by anyone else. Most importantly, I rediscovered what real relationships looked like. Without the looming obligation to my family, I had emotional bandwidth to nurture my friendships. I joined a book club, took weekend hiking trips with coworkers. I even started dating again, this time with clearer boundaries, healthier expectations. Therapy with Dr. Chin continued, first weekly, then bi-weekly. Family trauma doesn't vanish, she reminded me. Healing isn't a straight line. There will be relapses, doubts, but you're learning to respond, not just react. That's progress. One of the hardest parts of recovery was unlearning the distorted beliefs my family had instilled. I stopped apologizing for my success. I stopped feeling guilty for saying no. I started believing that generosity should never require self-sacrifice, that love should never come with a price tag. In July, I got an email from Aunt Patricia. She and Uncle Stephen were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary and were inviting a small group to their lake house. No drama, she promised. No manipulation, no other Mitchells. Just food, sunshine, and peace. He accepted, cautiously curious. The weekend was a revelation. Removed from the glare of my parents' status games, Patricia was a different person, warm, witty, and surprisingly perceptive. As we sat on the dock, watching the sun dip behind the treetops, she turned to me with a sigh. "Your mother was always like this," she said, "even as a teenager. Everything was transactional, what she could get, what she could show off. Your father wasn't much different. They were a perfect match. Ambitious, image-obsessed, and cold." I nodded, not surprised. "And when you were born," she continued, "they saw potential, but not the kind you think. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted an investment. And when you stopped yielding returns the way they expected, they turned to Jessica, hoping charm would succeed, where competence apparently wasn't flashy enough." Her words weren't easy to hear, but they were honest. And for the first time, I felt like someone had truly seen me. I wasn't alone in this anymore. "I always hoped you'd manage to escape their control," Aunt Patricia murmured as we watched the sun dip below the tree line, casting amber streaks across the lake's glassy surface. "I did," I said with a quiet smile. "It just took me 29 years. She reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "Better late than never, sweetheart." That moment marked a turning point, not just in my healing, but in the unexpected reconciliations that began unfolding in the months that followed. The most surprising came in August, from someone I had assumed was firmly entrenched in my parents' narrative, my cousin Taylor. She had been the one to post those now infamous Christmas photos that revealed I had been excluded. For a long time, I had associated her with complicity. But then, out of nowhere, she reached out via email. Unlike the dozens of veiled messages and accusations I'd received from other relatives, hers held no trace of manipulation. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened last Christmas," she wrote. "I didn't know the full story then, but over the past few months, I've seen Aunt Diana and Uncle Richard rewrite events right in front of me. They've made me question memories I was sure about. It's opened my eyes to a pattern I hadn't noticed before. I'm sorry I contributed to your hurt. If you're open to it, I'd like to reconnect, but only on your terms, no pressure." Her message stunned me. It was the first time anyone from my extended family had acknowledged the damage done, not as an abstract concept, but as something they had participated in and now regretted. We agreed to meet for coffee at a neutral cafe neither of us had been to before. The initial few minutes were awkward, filled with tentative small talk and polite questions, but slowly, as the caffeine kicked in and our guards lowered, the conversation warmed. We shared stories, some humorous, some painful, about what it was like growing up around my parents' expectations and silent judgments. Taylor confided that, since I'd cut contact, Jessica had grown increasingly demanding. My parents, no longer able to manipulate me, had turned their attention to other family members. "It's like they need a scapegoat or a project," she observed. "And when you stepped out of that role, they just redirected the spotlight onto someone else. Lately, it's been me." A familiar pang of guilt tugged at me, but this time I recognized it for what it was: misplaced responsibility. I was not accountable for how my parents treated others. Each of us had to recognize the dysfunction on our own and choose whether to engage with it or break free. Taylor and I agreed to take things slowly. No gossip, no expectations to attend family events. Just occasional conversations between two adults, bonded not only by blood, but now by mutual clarity. By the time autumn arrived, I had carved out a new normal for myself. My finances were completely protected, and the emotional safety net I had built with Leah and her family gave me the kind of warmth I had once believed only blood relatives could offer. My career was thriving, I was promoted again and entrusted with a major client portfolio, something I would never have had the capacity to handle in the chaos of my former family dynamics. Most of all, I had people in my life who saw me not as a source of resources, but as someone to genuinely know and care for. My social circle was filled with people who respected boundaries, celebrated my accomplishments, and offered help without expecting something in return. Despite the healing, some moments still triggered grief. Around mid-October, a year after I had hosted the Manhattan weekend in my failed attempt to reconnect with my family, I received a text from an unknown number. It turned out to be from Jessica. She had used a coworker's phone to bypass the no-contact order. "I hate what you did," the message read, "but I think I finally get it. Mom and Dad are putting me in charge of Thanksgiving this year and expect me to pay for everything. When I told Dad I couldn't afford it, he suggested I borrow from my 401k. I remembered what you said about only buying what you can actually afford. You were right. Don't respond. I'll deny this if they find out I contacted you. Just wanted you to know." I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't an apology, it didn't erase what had happened, but it was an acknowledgement, a sliver of recognition that maybe, just maybe, the cycle was becoming visible to her too. I didn't reply. But I saved the message, not as a souvenir of reconciliation, but as a reminder that clarity is possible even for those deeply entangled. As the holiday season approached once more, I found myself reflecting not with bitterness, but with perspective. The $52,000 0 cents invoice that had once felt like a devastating betrayal had, in hindsight, been the final catalyst I needed, the breaking point that freed me. What I once saw as the greatest crisis of my life had become the doorway to everything I'd needed but had been too afraid to demand: independence, peace, authenticity. I had learned that family isn't defined by blood or shared last names. It's defined by mutual respect, accountability, and love that doesn't come attached to conditions, invoices, or manipulation. I had learned that boundaries weren't a form of punishment. They were essential for survival, for health, for any real relationship to exist. And perhaps most profoundly, I had realized that walking away from people who harm you, even if they raised you, isn't betrayal. It's self-respect in its purest form. This Christmas, I wasn't dreading forced cheer at a table full of unspoken resentments. I had accepted Leah's invitation to spend the holidays at her family's cabin in Vermont. We'd spend Christmas Eve volunteering at a local shelter. On New Year's Eve, I had plans with colleagues, now friends, who had become my chosen support system. My life wasn't empty without my biological family. It was fuller, healthier, and for the first time, peaceful. The scars of my upbringing still lived within me. I still had occasional pangs of guilt, and moments of doubt crept in when I least expected, but I had learned to recognize those thoughts as echoes, not truths. Most importantly, I understood that love, real love, never be transactional, and that family can be found or built from people who show up for you without expecting anything in return. If you're watching this and any part of my story resonates with you, I want you to know this. You deserve relationships that uplift you, that adds to your life instead of draining it. You deserve boundaries, you deserve peace, and yes, you deserve to walk away if staying means losing yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, real family supports your growth, not your bank account.